Welcome to Strategic Thinking, Reading, and Teaching. This is part one of a two-part presentation. It can tend to be long, so we split it up. We're going to be talking about how people strategically think, and it's related to reading and, of course, teaching. And to do that, we need to share a common vocabulary. For this class, we want to be sure you can define technique, skill, strategy, strategic teaching, and strategic reading and thinking. Techniques are what the teacher does. And some examples of techniques you will be looking at: anticipation guides, KWL charts, Venn diagrams, literature circles, schema stories. These are your teaching techniques. These are what you do as a teacher to help students build skills and strategies. Those are different from skills, and skills are the learner's tools for learning. Some examples of skills are listed here: sequencing, decoding, paraphrasing, highlighting. When we ask a student to take notes, for example, we assume they have the skills of finding the main idea and highlighting that main idea. Often skills have to be taught, and they are essential to developing higher level strategies. Tools are used for information processing. In reading, individuals use skills for many of them are at the word level, but some attend to larger passages of text. We use skills automatically and often unconsciously, and again, back to reading, we use those to construct meaning. Skills are specific, and they are the components of strategies. And then we have strategies. And strategies are a big goal in what we want. Strategies are the learner's plan for learning. And these are things you want to definitely have committed to memory. These are what our ultimate goal would be in all instruction with our students, but specifically in this context in reading. Strategies include predicting and questioning and visualizing and inferring, synthesizing, summarizing, everything listed on the side here. Planners are problem solvers. So when you meet a student who stops the first time something wrong occurs, the first time they can't make meaning, you know they're not using strategies. A lot of times in the literature, skills and strategies are put at odds with one another. This is not the case, and it shouldn't get in the way of our teaching. There's a difference between practicing a skill in a short passage and understanding when and how the skill works with real continuous text. And this is what differentiates skills from strategies. And often in education we teach the skills and we don't provide enough opportunity to practice and apply and use those skills independently so that they become strategies or they become integral to the use of strategies. Skills are specific, sequential, and isolated. Their use is seldom planned or linked to practical purposes, and a good example of skills instruction in the schools are workbooks and drills. Not saying they aren't important, just saying we have to go beyond that and apply them to real-world contexts. Both are needed. Skills become strategies when the learner uses them, often in combinations, as part of a plan to comprehend, and adapts and changes them independently to the purposes or the genre. And if you think about cooking, for example, if you cook anything, and we're all old enough to have things that we cook pretty regularly. I, for example, make chocolate chip cookies a lot. Following the recipe to the T was a skill. I had to learn to measure and put the ingredients in correctly. As I became more and more skilled, I practiced with the recipe a little bit. I often tried things out, adapted and changed it because I was more familiar with it. And that is an example of a skill becoming almost to the point of a strategy. This is going to become very important to keep in mind, and it's not always differentiated in textbooks or in your classes, but we need to remember that teaching techniques are not strategies. Too often we as teachers focus on what we're doing to teach, and that's the technique, and we forget that we want the students to learn something as a result of that. Techniques are tools for teachers, strategies are tools for learners and thinkers of all ages. For example, I doubt many adult readers are going to sit down and complete a KWL chart. but they will use the strategy of drawing on and connecting to prior knowledge, or asking questions, or setting a purpose before they read. And those are all strategies we help children learn through the KWL chart. That's the difference between the teaching technique and the strategy we hope people will get from the technique. Strategic reading means the learner has a conscious, in-the-head plan for comprehending, an increased growing awareness of the reasoning process used to make sense out of print, and the ability to change and adapt the strategies used with the purpose for reading and or the genre being read. So just because I can read fiction doesn't mean I can automatically adapt my strategies and read nonfiction with comprehension. So strategic reading is thinking about reading in ways that enhance learning and understanding, knowing when, why, and how to use strategies. Another very important concept tied to this is metacognition, and that's knowing what you know and how you know it. It's just being aware of how you learn what you know. Strategic readers address their thinking in an inner conversation that helps them make sense of what they read. Readers take the written word and construct meaning based on their own thoughts, knowledge, and experiences. The reader is part writer. And readers of all ages use the same strategies but with differing levels of expertise and sophistication. Going back to metacognition, Perkins and Schwartz identified 4 different types of readers, and it's based on their own metacognitive levels as they're reading. So tacit learners or readers lack awareness of how they think when they read. They're not even aware. They just call the words and that's that. When they run into a bump, they don't know what to do to fix it. Aware learners or readers realize when meaning has broken down, but they may not have strategies to fix the problem. And these are the kids who will come to you and say, I don't get this, but they don't know what to do to help themselves figure it out. Reflective learners and readers are strategic about thinking and are able to apply strategies flexibly depending on their goals and purposes for reading. They reflect on, wonder about, and revise their use of strategies. Strategic learners and readers use thinking and comprehension strategies to enhance understanding and acquire knowledge. They can monitor and repair meaning. Needless to say, we want our students to be reflective and strategic when they read, and we want this to happen when they read at multiple levels and through multiple genres, and for many purposes. Scaffolding instruction is something you've most likely heard about in your studies or in your teaching, but it's something we want to remember because it's very important, and in the press of modern education we often forget that scaffolding is important. And if you've ever helped or remember yourself learning how to ride a bike, you know what scaffolding instruction is. You don't give the child 10 minutes of skill lessons on here's how you pedal, and here's how you balance, and here's how you ring the bell. You generally put the child on the bike so they can get the feel of the whole activity, and then you provide just enough help so the child can succeed. On the other hand, you don't go sit on the porch and have a cool drink while the child tries to ride the bike. You run alongside the bike at first, or you use training wheels and you hold on. You let go when the child's riding well, catching on when support is needed. The learner is put on a bike of the right size, set down to practice in a safe spot, and given praise for every little thing he or she does. And this is what scaffolded instruction is. So if you look at your instructional time here over time, when you begin instruction, your level of support as a teacher is very high, and that's the white bar here, whereas the level of student responsibility is very low. As you scaffold instruction over time, teacher support decreases so that it becomes a small piece, if any, and student responsibility increases so that they are able to practice and apply what they've learned independently. In the context of literacy, if you look at scaffolding instruction with that model in mind, first you model and explain the strategy. The student has very little responsibility here. They're just looking, they're watching, they're seeing how you actually figure something out when you read or write. Then the students practice the strategy with a range of text and with a lot of coaching from you or peers. The teacher monitors the use of the strategy over time You gradually remove support or scaffolding as the student moves towards independence with the strategy. You ask students what the strategy they're using is and why they're using it. You see if they're metacognitive about what they're using. And you also often point out, hey, you just used predicting and that's helping you do this, for example. And then you continue modeling and providing multiple and ongoing opportunities for students to apply the strategy. This is often where we break down in instruction too. We don't provide enough opportunities to apply, and we don't point out when we're actually using the strategy. So this is a good example of scaffolding instruction. This might be, if we go to, say, a teaching technique, you would use a worksheet to do KWL here. You'd put it up on the overhead or the interactive whiteboard, and you would show the student how you use KWL with a piece of text. Maybe the next week the student would try this with a small group, and they'd do their own KWL charts. And then you move along, get rid of the worksheet, so the students are just using their own note paper. They know what the purpose of the 3 columns are. Maybe they, at this point, maybe they're adding a 4th column. So KWL, then they learned, and then another one, the 4th column is, what more do I want to know? And that's when they're adapting the strategy, and that's when you know that they're actually have gotten what you want them to get. And that's an example of scaffolding. It's important to keep in mind that proficient reading occurs when 3 things are present, and this is true with learning, period. So if a reader's going to be proficient when they want to comprehend or they're interested in some way. That doesn't mean your students are going to be interested in everything, but we have to try to set up environments where there at least is some interest or some curiosity in the topics that we're going to be reading about. The second thing that has to be present, the reader has to be able to read. So when the reader can read, they have to have the skills of reading. If you're giving students text that is far above or even at their level of learning, of reading, they're going to have a hard time comprehending because they can't practice those higher level skills and strategies they need to practice. They're too focused on decoding the text. And the third thing is when the reader needs to read or make meaning. The student needs to be faced with some kind of challenge, some kind of meaningful material, some good reason to actually do the reading other than your grade depends on it. Well, how do we learn in real life? I was introduced to this my second year as a first grade teacher by Regie Routman, who had written quite a few books at the time, but I was lucky enough to teach with her. And she introduced Camborne's condition of learning, and they've never really left my teaching philosophy. So I want to share these with you because while we expect students to sit in our classroom and master everything we teach, most classrooms and schools in general are definitely not set up to allow this to happen. So what I want you to do is think of a hobby or a skill that you have learned and you participate in regularly. So it can be as mundane as brushing your teeth or as fun as cooking or gardening. Driving is always a good one, but something that you do on a regular basis that you pretty much do without too much thought. And think back on how you learned this hobby or skill. How many opportunities did you have to learn, practice, observe, enjoy, and apply this skill? If I use driving as an example, from very young I saw my parents driving. I watched what they did. I certainly got the benefits of it. I knew that it got me from point A to point B. Sometimes I would pretend drive, and you see commercials with little children pretend driving. Who taught you, when, where, and how often were you able to watch others do this? And all of us, as far as driving, different people taught us, but someone actually stopped and took the time to say, now this is what you do, and this is how you do it. Was there ever a thought that you wouldn't succeed? Were there people around you who expected you to achieve? I don't believe in my driving instruction anyone gave me the impression that I was not going to drive someday. If they had, 2 things could have happened. I could have given up and not driven, which has happened to some people I know, or I could have gotten angry about that lack of expectation and said, I'm going to do it whether you think I can or not. I'll show you. So the expectation, be it positive or negative, often plays a role in whether you're going to learn how to do something or not. And how much practice did it take? How many times did you practice without anyone watching? Yeah, with driving, you don't usually practice too much without anyone watching until you get your license, but you become a better driver after those first few spins on ice, or in the north anyway. In the south, I'm not sure. Maybe the water hydroplaning a little bit, or you learn that if you go through a stop sign, you might get hit by someone. So there's lots of times you practice and you learn from the results. And then how many times did you get feedback from others on your progress? And that feedback can come from all sorts of people, from police officers who let you know you broke a rule, to when you're being trained on driving, someone will tell you, oh, don't do that. To just your friend sitting next to you in the car saying, would you slow down? Or, do you realize you've gone through that stoplight? So in learning your hobby or skill, these are the conditions that would have been present for lasting learning to take place. These are Camberon's conditions of learning. You'll find them in other places named other things. I found them so important to my teaching that I made this little chart on a piece of paper, and I had it in my lesson plan book for as long as I taught, because I wanted to remind myself that if these were not present in my classroom, the learning was not going to always take place. So immersion, demonstration, expectation, responsibility, use, approximation, and response. And I'm going to explain each one. Immersion is lots and lots of experiences. In the literacy classroom, this means you've got a room filled with text, filled with all sorts of books, articles, web pages, brochures, lots of text, and not just sitting there, but accessible to students, and there's time for students to actually access the material. And then there's demonstration. So the text is all around. Demonstration is seeing how it's done by someone who knows how. And this is when you're doing that explicit instruction, and this is when you're modeling what you do as a reader, or you're pointing out what other students in the class have done as a reader. Some examples are read aloud, think aloud, paired reading, shared reading, and reading buddies. There's also expectation. This is another condition that has to be there for learning. There's a strong belief from those around you that you will be successful. So clear standards, rules, and routines are shared. They're referred to regularly and used consistently. There's an expectation that you will do this. There's accountability for all and careful monitoring. And this comes from the entire learning community and is very important. Everyone is sharing their literacy, and everyone expects every child to be literate and to be learning to read and write and use those skills. And then there's the responsibility. If I had not wanted to learn how to drive, I probably wouldn't have put a whole lot of time into it. But the first was the expectation that I was going to do it, and then was the responsibility. I wanted to do it. I wanted to be able to drive myself around. So being in charge of your own learning and being motivated to learn. This happens in the literacy classroom when there is relevant and meaningful engagement with print. So if you're only going to use worksheets that mean absolutely nothing to students, they're not going to take a responsibility in their learning. Use. There's plenty of practice, often in useful situations. Again, back to the driving, you didn't just learn how to drive overnight. You practiced and learned from things that you did. So there are lots of opportunities in the literacy classroom for reading and writing, speaking and listening and viewing, practicing strategies in self-selected text that they are able to read. Apply, apply, apply. Approximation. This is when you try things out, and we often call that mistakes, but mistakes are just steps in learning. So you're allowed to try things out or approximate, and then you try some more and you make adjustments, and that's how you learn how to do something. And then there's response. Relevant, timely, non-threatening feedback from knowledgeable others. Opportunities for the teachers and peers to respond and encourage social construction of meaning, side-by-side coaching of like an apprenticeship model. When someone learns how to do a technical trade, they have someone who knows how to do that trade side-by-side with them, coaching them, teaching them how to do it. And how are these 7 conditions present in your classroom? Without them, people can't truly learn. So in summary, we have lots of events we participate in life. Here's some: sports, a math problem, a science investigation, a business decision, a home decision, a video game. They all are events. Regardless of the subject, topic, life situation, or problem, active independent thinkers use thinking strategies and skills before, during, and after the event. And this will become a recurring theme. We don't just use thinking before, or we don't just use it after. We use before, during, and after. We plan. So as teachers, we help students become active independent thinkers by teaching techniques to help students develop thinking strategies and skills and use them independently before, during, and after a thinking event. We show kids how by reading aloud, by thinking aloud, by lifting text, by reasoning through text, by rereading for deeper meaning. And we explicitly instruct students and focus their attention on the strategies to be practiced. We name the strategy, we make it visible, we explain how it helps with reading, we demonstrate how we use it, and we refer to the strategy frequently as the students use it. Having a list of strategies up on the wall or anywhere where students can see it and use it is very important, because it isn't good enough to just teach questioning as a strategy and then forget about it. You need to keep coming back to it. Students practice them in many different ways. They should participate in Think Aloud so that they are metacognitive about what they're doing with the strategy. And they respond to reading in many, many different ways. So here are some examples of reading responses. We want to make sure that there are oral responses, that there are written responses, and that we hit all the different modes of thinking, multiple intelligence if you want to get into that, or learning styles that students have in our responses to reading, so that they make a connection between the reading and the print. And that is all for this part 1, and part 2 is next.